Thank you so much for coming. Hi. My name is Meira Blaustein. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Woodstock Film Festival. So great to have you. It's the last day of the festival. Been doing a lot of things in the past few days. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Marketech, Toyota, 120dB Films, all of the great companies that support us. This panel that every year the festival has some really great 8 to 10 panels about all kind of subjects, from screenwriting and acting and directing to impact filmmaking and all sort of subject matters within the film industry and even subjects of films. The panel that you are about to see here is about autobiographical filmmaking, films by filmmakers who turn the lens onto themselves and onto their very close world. And we will find out a lot about the reasoning behind it, how they make it into something that is an incredible creation of artistic merit, because they all are incredible artists and the films are extraordinary. And just really get more into depth and into the world of film as memoir or memoir filmmaking. Because that genre, believe it or not, is growing leaps and bounds. There's so many great films now these days within that genre. So I'd like to bring Simon Kilmurry, who is the head of the IDA, International Documentary Association. Simon has been running also POV for many years. Simon is one of the giants of documentary filmmaking in the US and abroad, and very thrilled to have him in Woodstock. And he's going to bring the rest of the filmmakers, Gayle, Doug, and Alan Berliner. Come on up, and the four of them will, Simon will take the conversation and we'll lead them into their respective stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks all for coming out on Sunday morning. And thanks Alan, Gayle, and Doug for taking the time to be with us today. I've been working in the documentary field for quite a long time, and there are a few of those kind of eureka moments where you see a film and it changes you, and it changes how you think about what filmmaking can be and what it can do. For me, one of those films was a film called Silver Lake Life back in the early 90s at the height of the AIDS crisis, and it was a first-person narrative, first-person story, really a love story between two men who were both dying of AIDS in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. And it really, amidst all of the fear and hyperbole and rhetoric that was in the media around AIDS and HIV at the time, and how terrifying it was, it really put a personal face on that issue. And I'm happy that Doug Block is here, because he was one of the producers of that film, and it changed how I looked at documentary film. So I'm really thrilled this morning to have three filmmakers with us who each have worked in this personal documentary space for a long time. And I'm going to do very short introductions and show a little clip from some films that they have, from one of each of their films. I won't read their full bios because those are in the book, so you can see those properly. But the first one I want to introduce is Alan Berliner. He's a filmmaker whose work I have been a fan of for a long time. His films include Nobody's Business, Intimate Stranger, The Sweetest Sound, Wide Awake, and his most recent film, his First Cousin, Once Removed. I want to show a clip from the beginning of Nobody's Business. And Alan, I'm wondering if you want to say anything before I show this. This is one of your early personal films.
We're showing the introduction.
Yeah.
Of Nobody's Business. To say very simply, it's a film I made about my father. At least I thought when I began the film that it was going to be a film about my father, a portrait of my father. And I quickly realized early on, particularly in the course of editing the film, that was not really what I was doing, nor was it even possible to do, because I realized in the end that my father, at least as portrayed in the film, is who he was, and in relation to me. In other words, I'm not making a portrait of my father so much as I was making a portrait of our relationship. And I think that the clip that you're about to see, the introduction of film, reveals that dynamic and reveals that quite obviously.
Okay. So we're going to show this first clip from Nobody's Business.
The story is told about a man who went to an artist and said, I want to have a picture made. The artist turned to him and said, look, there are two kinds of pictures. There's a portrait and a landscape. He said, well, which is cheaper? The artist said, the landscape. He said, well, can you make a landscape of me? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. How long do you think this is going to take, Alan?
About an hour. Tell me about this picture. It looks like you're about to sing. It looks like you're about to sing or give a speech somewhere.
No, that's not so. I'm just posing.
For whom? For what?
I'm just posing for the picture to be taken.
There's no story behind the image?
Well, you want me to make up stories? Alan, before we go any further, let me tell you something. I'm just an ordinary guy who's led an ordinary life. I was in the Army, I got married, I raised a family, worked hard, I had my own business. That's all. That's nothing to make a picture about.
Someone in the audience is watching right now and saying, why am I here watching this film about this guy?
I would ask too, because I don't know what the hell they're doing there. I'm being honest with you.
You should be honored.
I'm not.
Your life not only can be
My life is nothing. My life is no different from I don't know how many billions of people's. Who the hell would care about Oscar Berliner? Who the hell am I? You know, it's ridiculous.
Everyone has a life that has something special about it.
No.
Your life has nothing special?
No.
Nothing.
Look.
How could you be so convinced about that?
You're trying to make something of nothing.
You're my father. I have to do it. I need to do it.
You don't have to do it.
I have to do it.
Alan, you're going to do what you want to do, whether I want you to do it or don't want you to do it. I'm telling you, you're wasting your time. Shit.
What's the matter?
Nothing. What happens now?
I just want to be open and honest right up front. That I want to know everything there is to know about you and our family.
If it gives you satisfaction, be my guest.
Where are you from?
I'm from America, born and raised in America. What else do you want to know?
No, you're the child of immigrants.
You know how many children of immigrants there are?
That's exactly right. And each one has a story, and they want to know your story.
Okay, are you convinced of that? I'm not.
There's a lot to dig into that just in those 2 minutes.
If he could be here, he would say, you're all crazy for being here. We're crazy for being here. This is all very ridiculous. That's what he would say. Yeah.
But this is the movie that launched Oscar Berliner as an international film star. So
that's true. That is true.
Our next panelist is Gayle Kirschenbaum. Gayle's film "Look at Us Now, Mother" is playing in the festival, so I hope we've had a chance to see it. Is there one more screening coming up, Gayle, or is it done?
Last night was the last.
Her other films include My Nose and A Dog's Life, a documentary. And I think you'll begin, as we watch these clips, you'll begin to see these films in dialogue with each other. So I want to show the beginning of your most recent film. Do you want to set this up for us before we're going to see?
So it's the opening?
Yeah, the opening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
Or
I
just
think
wanna
they should. I think they
just
should
launch
just.
into
I
it?
think since we're showing the opening,
Okay.
so just watch it.
All right.
This story might resemble yours, whether you're father, son, mother, or daughter. We all have a story. Did you ever feel like you were born into the wrong family?
Oh, you're breaking it. I will break it. I will break it. Don't break it. Then turn it off.
This is a film about forgiveness.
Look how washed out your eyes look. Look in the mirror. The nose is not going to improve. It's going to drop. Why aren't you married? Are you afraid of commitment?
I wish I knew, Mother.
This is a mother-daughter story.
I'm across the street from you.
How can you park like that?
Because I drove in. I went back in.
How would you describe how we get along?
You don't.
I'll park the car. You want to? Let me park the car, please. I couldn't do it before. Let me do it.
Have you two ever agreed on anything?
Let me do the car. Can you let me just park?
Get out of my way. We need to not even talk to each other.
All right. You want to start now?
Am I ever going to be able to understand, forgive, and cherish my mother before time runs out?
And how's your mom?
Mom's great. She's in Boca. She would have joined us, but she's got many festivals, so she's taking a little break.
Great. And finally, our third panelist is Doug Block. Doug is an award-winning director and producer. His films include 51 Birch Street and The Kids Grow Up. His most recent film for HBO was 112 Weddings. Doug has also produced a number of films in this kind of subgenre of documentary, including The Edge of Dreaming by Amy Hardy, as I mentioned, Silver Lake Life, and I believe you were also involved in Sarah Polley's film, Stories We Tell, right?
Story consultant early on.
Right. So I want to show the trailer for The Kids Grow Up. Do you want to say anything before I show this, or?
No, except I'm the father in that case. All these films are about dads. It's so complicated.
And mothers.
Yeah, some mothers.
How's it feel being 16? Do you feel grown up?
I feel kind of grown up. Yeah, I do. There's like a long period of time where I just felt too like young. I was like stuck being young.
Do you have happy memories of your childhood?
I am a child. This is my childhood.
I'm not gonna just tell you everything.
You're not gonna tell me anything.
Yeah.
You know, I joke about your Peter Pan complex, but I think, I think it's true. In most ways, you don't want to grow up.
It's hard to let go. It's hard to let go. And it's also, realizing that you are moving on, moving up in age as well, too.
Yes, we are.
As hard as it is to let you go off, I must say I'm really excited for you.
Feels like my life has just changed.
You're making a film about me going away to college, but instead of experiencing me going away to college, you're just trying to film it.
No, I think you're not in touch with what a hard time of transition this is.
It's hard having you grow up. Hard on your old man.
It's harder for you than it is for me, and it shouldn't be.
So as we dive into this conversation, I want to make it a conversation, because I think all of your work speak to each other's work in certain ways, and then we'll be opening it up for the audience also to ask questions. But my first question, I think, for all three of you is, the title of this panel is Film as Memoir. And I think in the panel description it talked about the explosion of print memoirs, and now film increasingly being a form for memoir. So I'm curious to hear from you what you would see as why film as a form to tell these stories rather than a written memoir. What does film bring to it that writing it down wouldn't? Go.
Okay, so, well, you can hear and see. When I made my film, I had this huge archive from the 50s of 8mm footage, which was phenomenal. And the other thing that really hit me was I had archival footage of my grandmother, but it was silent. And when I found an audio tape of a phone conversation with her. So I even think audio brings a person even closer to you than even just the visual. I mean, I think you can compare the written word to the experience. Even when I listen to audiobooks, I remember Tuesdays with Maury, I was listening to the book and then Maury came on, and I heard him. If I would have read the book, I wouldn't have. So it's an amazing medium that we're lucky to have, that you can take someone on this journey with the visual, the audio, yeah.
Well, I think also, a lot of these films are about time and take place over time. Because like Gayle says, we have old photos and we have old home movies and archival footage, which, Alan uses an awful lot to really great effect. And we're filmmakers, we're not writers, so, we work in the medium that we know and are comfortable with, but there's something really so powerful about, I tried to show it in my trailer, cutting back and forth in time, that I just don't think you can do the equivalent in print or really any other medium. And, it's the real people. There's also something very moving to know that these are not characters we've made up. They're real people, and they're also the people closest to us often in our lives. So that brings its own set of really thorny issues that we have to wrestle with. We have to be able to tell a story that we're a character in the film, whether we're like very present in it or on the periphery. But it's not therapy and it's not home movies. It has to resonate with people, audiences who see it, who could give a shit about us. So, we also have to be able to stand back and see the story somewhat objectively and see ourselves as characters somewhat objectively, and fitting all the requirements of story that people come to movies to see, which involves story arcs and character arcs. And so there's a lot of very complicated factors that go with making movies that are autobiographical. Everything from the story demands to, your cast, which, on the one hand, it's great because you have this access to them that nobody else could get. On the other hand, you want to be truthful, you want to present conflict there, because that's what's dramatic. At the same time, you want to be back invited to Thanksgiving, and you want your daughter to talk to you again after the movie's out. So,
I concur with all that's been said. It's simply the visceral level. I mean, in the case of You've Met My Father, if I wrote a book about my father, you would be missing the quality, the timbre of his voice, you know. You'd be missing all the content that's inside of his facial expressions and you know, everything that comes with images and pictures and you know, the presence of a person. It also made me think, I made a film before Nobody's Business called Intimate Stranger. And Intimate Stranger was my grandfather, my mother's father, died in the middle of writing his autobiography. And 16 years later, I decided to go and unearth all the boxes of that endeavor, which had been stored in the back of my uncle's office for all those years. And of course, I could have finished his autobiography for him as a written work. I certainly could have done that. But and what did I have to work with? I had thousands of photographs and thousands of letters and documents. That's basically what was in the box, although I did discover some home movies that I had to do a little private detective work to find. But the point is, what I even had to work with were the materials generally of a book: documents, letters, papers, and photographs. But instead, I used his manual typewriter. I had his old manual typewriter. I had someone type up sections of his autobiography, and I used the sound of the, you know, tick-tack, tack-tack of his autobiography as a rhythmic / musical device, structuring device for manipulating, for editing, for creating interludes and sequences of those letters and of those photographs and of those documents, and gave it a cinematic dimension, which I think brought things to life that otherwise would have been somewhat dormant and again, less visceral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Doug, you were talking about the kind of responsibility of storytelling and character development and story arc, and I'm curious, how do you separate or do you separate yourself when you're making these films? So you're kind of standing back and saying, who is this character, when you're looking at yourself or looking at your family?
Yeah. I mean, when I'm making the film, you know, I keep a notebook. I'm like constantly keeping notes of like, what is my role in the film? What is the story here? You know, what's underneath the story? What are the themes? You know, because I think it dictates the questions you ask in the interviews. You know, for 51 Birch Street, I understood pretty quickly that my role was, in brief for those who haven't seen it, I grew up on Long Island. My parents had this wonderful, seemingly 54-year marriage. My mother died kind of quickly and unexpectedly of pneumonia, and 3 months later, my father called from Florida to announce he was moving in with his secretary from 40 years earlier. I went back for the last time, I thought a few weeks before the movers came, and found among all the things being packed away and packed out 3 large cartons of my mother's diaries, going all the way back to that time. And I was, you know, close to my mother growing up, and my father was always this kind of authoritarian figure who was, you know, who I loved, but like was kind of fearsome, and I didn't really know that well. And it became, you know, I had 2 weeks basically before he moved away to kind of get at what their relationship was like, because like one peek at the diaries, I was opening Pandora's box to, you know, a image of my parents' marriage that was extremely unhappy. And so I knew, like, as soon as I started thinking about it, I realized my role is to be the aggrieved son who's defending his mother, and I'm going to get the goods on my father. Was he having an affair all this time? I'm going to like get at it and get at it. And that dictated my whole line of questioning to him for the film, knowing all the time, by the way, that whether he did or didn't actually didn't even matter. And in fact, in the course of the film, my father completely opens up, and you know, we have this complete reversal in our relationship that, you know, usually you only get in fiction films. in terms of father-son relationships. And that wasn't something I could control, or even after, it just happened. But it was really important that when I was interviewing him, all the time, I would, you know, in every possible way, I would ask him if he was having an affair, but he wasn't the kind of guy I could ever, our relationship was such that I could never ask him directly, and it almost became a running joke. So, Dad, you know, I noticed you had lots of photos of very pretty women in your photos, and, you know, and it was about the evasion, you know, and that became really, you know, I realized at the time that was actually good, that worked. So yes, in answer to your question, I think it's really important to understand that you play a role. In the kids grow up with my daughter leaving for college, my role was to be the dad who was going to fall apart when her daughter left. That wasn't really true. You know, it was partly true, but you know, I was also very happy for her, you know, and felt like, oh, you know, great that we did such a good job that she'll go off and have this great life on her own. But that didn't work for the film. It was too complicated for the film. So, you know, we really played up and maybe even went too far in the idea that it would be very hard on me when she left, and dealing with all those feelings as a parent.
Gayle, Alan, how do you deal with you know, watching yourself in a film and putting yourself in the position of an audience who has to relate to you as a character?
Well, first of all, I didn't really intend to make this movie, so most of this footage was not meant for the public. I had just been sort of documenting my life with a little home video camera and literally doing selfies, you know, aiming it at myself. When the film became a mission, because I had made this little film called My Nose about my mother's relentless campaign to get me to have a nose job. Yes, and when I didn't have one. And when I saw the audience reaction, and when they would tell, people would stand online and then they would tell me their story, and then I suddenly became an accidental therapist. I started coaching people. I developed what I call the 7 healing tools, and I suddenly was doing seminars teaching people how to forgive and transform difficult relationships, all accidentally. And then I heard more stories, and then I went, oh my God, I have to make a film. And I knew when the Nose film played in DC, at a festival, we ended up on the cover of the Washington Post style section, and one of the many things my mother has said about me is that my nose looks like the Indian on the buffalo nickel. So she does have a point. So the picture was my profile in front of that Indian's profile, and the journalist's first line into it was, if you have a mother like Gayle Kirschenbaum, you better get yourself into psychoanalysis. Mom read it, and she goes, great, bad press is better than no press. So I knew then when I always kind of say, this is like John Lennon's line, life is what happens to you when you're busy making plans, because even though you mentioned 2 other sort of auto or memoir or me in the film, I've spent a career on TV making films about other people, other subjects, TV shows. So I then realized, oh my God, I have to tell my story of forgiveness. I have to go on this journey with my mother because nobody's going to do it. Because I was doing seminars and panels with people. It didn't matter how rich you are, how famous you are, how many children, grandchildren, homes you have. People are suffering. And they're not letting go of the pain because so many people were hurt and traumatized as a child. And they haven't released that pain, and they haven't been able to forgive. So this film became a mission, and actually it's a new life for me. I'm starting a movement that is focused on forgiveness and healing, and I'm sort of narrowing it between mothers and daughters because that's what we are. So in making the film, to get back to your question, I just said, I'm putting it out there. This is not a vanity piece. This is my story. And whatever I have to do to help people, I'm going to do it. So I looked at myself, and also as a filmmaker and a storyteller, oh, here's the story. I had a couple of other editors on board, and it didn't seem right. And I felt like you're going to slit your wrist. And humor is really important. And if you see my film, my mother's a laugh a minute, and I could be pretty irreverent. So the best thing I did for this movie is actually edit it, which wasn't my original desire. But I needed to take you, because I knew the material's hard, you know, about child abuse. And I wanted to take you on a journey. So I in my editing it was, heavy, light. I wanted to take the arc and make you go on this journey. And I didn't care. For me, I didn't care if you saw snot coming out of my nose. It was, I'm doing this to help people. And whatever I have to put of myself in here, it's going in here. This is reality. So that was it.
If I could just say one thing. No press is better than bad press.
Not according to my mother.
So, Alan, how do you go about crafting yourself as a character? You have such a distinct voice in your films.
Well, I'm going to take a bit of a more generalized approach to the question.
Yeah.
There are the general credits of the film. There's producer, director, editor, cinematographer, I don't know, writer, all those things. And okay, that's a given. But in the films that I make, that we make, in my case, depending on the person and the situation and the circumstance, I'm the son, the brother, the father, the cousin, the nephew, the uncle. I got all that covered? You get the idea. You get the idea. And so I have a lot of different perspectives to account for and to explore. Then there are the more other kinds of generalized roles that I play that I enjoy, actually, because for me every film I make is a kind of equation that balances need and fascination. And on the fascination level, for instance, I enjoy every film I make. I'm also a bit of a private detective. I also enjoy being the sociologist and the psychologist and the healer, or the I said private detective, historian, anthropologist, archivist, librarian, family keeper of the memory. I mean, a lot of different roles enter into this, and I'm trying to keep all those sort of the polyphony of all those voices in play and in harmony, because a lot of times they cross-pollinate and they cross-fertilize and they inform one another, and that's what I'd like to think is part of the layering of the story and the layering of the implication of what I'm trying to do.
Doug, you, for those of us in the documentary world, famously wrote your 10 rules of personal documentary filmmaking. And rule number 1 is don't make it all about you, even though it's all about you. And Alan, I remember in an interview that you did a number of years ago, you said, it's not about me, it's about you, as in talking to the audience. You pointed to the audience when you said that. So those two things are somewhat in tension. And I'm curious to hear from both of you how you think about it. Are these films about both you and the audience? How do you reconcile those, or can you?
I think it's both. I mean, I think inevitably it's about you. I actually think it's about the art of making it seem not like it's not about you, but of course it's about you. And again, whether you're in it very prominently, followed around by a camera, or whether it's a lot more subtle and you're just behind the camera, it's still you, it's your life. But it's you in relationship to an audience, and I think the pitfall of working this way, and why there's some personal documentaries that are really gruesome to watch, is when the filmmakers lose sight of the fact that there's an audience, that it's not all about them. And the purpose isn't for them to heal. And therapy would be a whole lot less expensive than doing this, I assure you. So yeah, I mean, I think you're always, Alan said it really well. It's not just your role as a producer and director, and usually camera person and writer, often editor, fundraiser. You're the father, the son, and you're historian. You're working out many, many, many things, but always in relationship to an audience. I always think of, why would this be interesting to an audience in Sweden or Asia or some other culture, possibly in some other language? What what are those aspects of whatever story I'm working out that is universal and timeless, and doesn't matter when they see it. Yeah, does that answer?
Can I just say one thing, even though I know we're human beings? We're telling a story about humans. We are all humans. We all have issues in our life. We all have a father and a mother. Our stories are universal. They might be our story, but they're relatable on some level. So we're just revealing our own story that we want to share for whatever. We each have our own reasons why we've done each of our films, but they're relatable on certain levels. So they're universal. So yes, I believe when we craft our film, we are thinking about our audience. But we know it's relatable because there's somebody in the audience, if not many people, who are going to go, that's my story. Oh, my mother. Oh, my father. So that's it.
Another thing I'm also very aware of is the need for humor in these kinds of films. That
absolutely.
It's just so gruesome if you take yourself too seriously. And there's any hint of woe is me. We're very privileged to be in this position of being able to tell our stories, and assume that other people are even mildly interested in it. And I do feel like, for some reason in this art form, you talked about what's different about making films, about memoir. I mean, it's sort of strange when you think about it. Almost every other art form, self-portraits and autobiography is embraced. Certainly in theater, what are the most time-honored plays? Think of Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller or even Neil Simon. They're all very autobiographical plays, the classics. And what's bigger art than Rembrandt's self-portraits or Picasso's or somehow or other. And I don't know if you guys agree with me on this. I feel like audiences come to these kinds of films almost like, who the fuck are you to tell, to think your life is so important, and then you're showing a very representational portrait of your family. It's not like you can disguise it with elegant writing. You're putting them up there, and so I feel like it's got to be entertaining, and you can't take yourself too seriously. And so I'll build whole scenes around stuff that made me laugh when I first watched the scene. I think humor is that important, particularly at the beginning of the film.
And humor is very healing. I mean, that's so important because, we tell tough stories. We're going into our life, and there's reason we're driven to tell our stories, and they're not easy. So I think humor is really, really important. And in my film, I like to leave everyone with a laugh. So, yeah, humor. Do you remember what Norman Cousins' theory of laughter? You remember? Yeah, so laughing is important.
Yeah, a few things. Maybe this is something we can end with or bring back later about your question about memoir versus film, because it is true that you audiences and you readers are a lot more, how should we say, forgiving and open to memoir type storytelling in literature, novelistically, than you are cinematically as story in quote-unquote personal documentary film, which is an interesting phenomenon. And so we could talk about that later with audience interaction. But I mean, some of the pratfalls that might be part of part of the minefield that we have to negotiate and work through is it's pretty easy. It's often easy to recognize symptoms of narcissism, symptoms of self-aggrandization, of what's the more than you need to know. I'm under the weather. No, I'm under the weather. That's too personal to tell you that. I don't have access to all the parts of my brain this morning. I'm sorry. Working out a grudge, where people work out a grudge, or a film that's made for revenge, things like that. You recognize that easily, and then the film, then you sort of push it away, Whereas something that's mediated in a work of literature or something and takes time and there's exposition, you allow for it. Whereas it's turned off more in this proscenium cinematic dimension. Sentimentalization is what I'm trying to say. You know, gee, look at my father, look how great he is. My father was so great, I thought I should make a film about him, and you need to know that. You know, that kind of thing. But back to the original question, I sort of have a simple equation for this kind of thing, which is this. I can't really explain how it happens. I can't even teach it, but I know it when I see it, and I know it when it happens to me as a viewer. And I'd like to think I can try to get there as a filmmaker, which is this thing behind me. Sorry, I always think there's no screen behind me. I guess it's that we'll have to work with. The screen, the white surface, okay? When you walk into the room, it's a screen. It's a window. Let's leave screen for a second. It's a window. And when we look through a window, we look out at the world. We learn about the world. We learn about others. We learn about other cultures. It's the same dynamic when we go to Hollywood films. We look through it to laugh, to cry, but we look to go outside of ourselves. That's what it's a window out, a window towards, a window to. But in the kind of work that we do, that window has to turn into, at some point, a mirror, okay? Where you start to then reflect upon your own lives, your own selves, your own stories, your own relationships, your own analogous experiences. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both a window and a mirror simultaneously, and that's where we have you, in that kind of mysterious, magical place where it functions on both levels and both dimensions. You're seeing through, but you're also seeing yourself. You're recognizing dimensions and aspects of your own lives, your own stories, and it's making you think differently about who you are as you sit in that seat. On any number of those levels that we talked about, you know, whatever kind of relationship you're in, what kind of family you're in, you know, and all those polyphony of voices that are part of who each and all of we are. That was not a good grammatical end to that sentence, but I think you got what I mean.
Alan, would you agree, though, that when they don't work, it's because it's the balance between looking out and looking in is off? It becomes too much of a mirror, and you can sense the filmmakers, you know, that's where the narcissism seems to come in?
Well, I mean, again, I can't qualify it. I can't make an equation for it, or I can't make a formula for it, but I would say too much emphasis on me, and not us is not helpful, for sure, yeah.
Alan, Doug also and Gayle were talking about the role of humor, and it's certainly something which comes through both in your writing and your voice. There is humor in all your films, and self-deprecating humor. Is that something that just comes naturally? Is it something you have to work towards? And this is really a question for all of you, because I think it's quite prominent in all of your films. There is kind of this self-deprecation element where you don't take yourselves quite too seriously.
I don't know if it's because you're Jewish. It's just, you know, I just see the humor. I see the humor in tragedy, which is kind of bizarre. But yeah, it's sort of like how I look at life, and I feel lucky, you know. If and when you see my film, my mother's a laugh a minute. But I think it's really important to see humor in things, and you know, documentaries, whether they're memoir or not memoir films, are heavy. You know, they're subjects, they're issues, they're whatever. And I see, that's why I actually took over my editing, because I had other editors, and I needed to get my own voice and my own irreverent voice in there. So it does come naturally. I do actually do some writing, but I do love humor, and it is part of my character, I guess. So for me, it's easy. It's not learned. It's my voice.
I would say that part of the formula that I can't formulate, that's unformulatable, is if the audience senses that you're able to laugh at yourself or make fun of yourself or allow for self-deprecation in whatever form it takes, and there are many forms of that, that's part of a kind of relaxation that takes place. It eases that critical, narcissistic button that you press, that an audience might press to sort of label this film as a self-indulgent project, etc. And I think it's a very important part of the equation, one way or the other. Yeah.
I found a quote years ago that really resonated for me, and I only found out in recent times it was attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. Who knew? It was like the best piece of filmmaking advice I ever got, so I printed it out and put it on my wall. And it goes something like, "You wouldn't worry so much what people think of you if you realized how seldom they do." And it's been what's enabled me to make these kinds of films, really, and not worry too much about the reaction, and just kind of go on instinct. It's both instinct and it's trusting your instincts, but also there's a real craft level involved too. And Alan and Gayle both edit themselves. I don't. I mean, I can edit, but I like to work with the best editor I can possibly have because I love collaborating. And for me, it's really important to have somebody who can sort of stand back objectively and, help me sort of be a step removed from the process, and bring the craft level to storytelling that I think these require.
Gayle, I want to show a clip from your film. It's the diary clip. And it's a very painful moment where you're revealing something very, a really, challenging moment in your childhood. So I'm going to show this clip, and then I have a question for you.
I just remember going nuts on Mom for not letting you be you. That, how you didn't do anything wrong, and how mean and cruel and humiliating, and it was, what she did to you.
October 5th, 1962. Mom got Erwin to put me on top
of the refrigerator. I couldn't get down, and they all laughed at me. I hate when they do that.
As an older brother, sometimes you weren't in agreement with my theory and my thoughts. When little ones get in the way, I mean, if they don't understand what you're saying and they don't agree with you, then I...
Oh, I'm sorry. Much longer. Yeah, it was much longer. It's labeled to 10, so what? I apologize. It's labeled as 2 minutes, 10 seconds long. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you can fill it out and... Because it's not playing here.
Okay.
Can you fill out what happens in the rest of this scene here?
Trying to remember.
It's this moment of you revealing this, how your mother would pull your brothers into this almost like a game of abuse of you, and you're talking with your brother about it, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to comment on one thing because it is a diary. One of my challenges, because this is a story about my childhood, which was challenging, and about my journey to forgive my mother, my lead abuser. So I was really challenged by, I didn't want to be a victim. I didn't want to go on about my story and complain about what happened to me, because who cares about a victim? And I knew I'd have childhood friends that I would dig up who were there and witness things, and my brothers did do interviews. But then I had that light bulb moment, and I had been journaling and keeping a diary my whole life, and I knew I had a box of my diaries from childhood, and I thought they were thrown away. But after a long search, I found them. And that was the answer for me. I wanted you, the audience, to get in my head at the time this was happening. So I used select diary entries, and I always used to draw in those diary books, I was always drawing. So I used my drawings. So all the drawings in the film are my drawings from my young years. So so as far as memoir storytelling.
Yeah. So my question for you is, in revealing those moments which are so painful, how do you go about doing that? Is there a line that you can go up to and that you can't cross? Where do you? How much can you reveal? What's that process like for you, revealing those, particularly those painful moments?
Right. Well, I am generally a fairly open person, and I come from a family where there are no boundaries. I mean, things that come out of my mother's mouth, you would be shocked me. So, in general, I am quite open and revealing. In one of the earlier cuts of the film, I had more dark stuff in there, dark diary entries, of worse stuff. But I pulled it out, not because I personally was afraid to reveal that, but because I kept thinking about, I always kept my audience in mind, and I thought, I don't need to take them down such a dark road. I just need them to see the challenge that I had and see it and hear it and feel it. And so I ended up really, cutting out some of the very, very dark stuff, but I think it served the film and serves my audience just fine. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. One of the thing that documentary makers always talk about is access. And of course, you guys have ultimate access. You have access to yourselves, but you also have access to your families. Negotiating access with outsiders is one thing, but then negotiating access with yourself and with your families is something else entirely, and also the responsibility that entails. How do you, this is for all three of you, go about negotiating that access into yourselves? And maybe I can show Alan your clip from Wide Awake, which I think illustrates it really well. And then Doug, I want to show a clip, a last clip from The Kids Grow Up, which it raises the question about access to your daughter. Yeah. So I'm going to show two clips back to back. One is from the montage scene from Wide Awake. Do you want to set it up? Or?
Sure. Okay. The basic project of documentary film, every documentary film that's shown at this festival, more or less every documentary film that you've ever seen, is based on this idea of access. Someone had access to a person, a place, a thing, a series of events, some kind of proprietary knowledge of something, a forehead. I mean, when I think about the grand prize winner last night, Incorruptible, and I think, my God, how complicated that had to be. She had access to the rebels, to the outsider party. She had access to the governing party. She had access to the military. Let her do things. I mean, even the film Three Hikers, she had access to, through the Iranian government, through the American State Department, to each three of the hikers. I mean, it's incredible, the access that filmmakers now have to the world. I'm daunted by just the idea of it, let alone the phone calls that have to be made to do all that. But that's what it is, access, right? And I wanted to make a film. I had this compelling notion about making a film about insomnia. I've been a poor sleeper my whole life. And certainly if I wanted to have access, or the kind of access I could have generated to make a sort of film about insomnia, I certainly could have put an ad in the newspaper. Filmmaker looking for insomniacs, would you be willing for me to follow your story over time, and would you allow me to do that? Or I could have contacted various sleep doctors. Maybe you could put me in touch with some of your patients, maybe a new patient or two or three, and maybe we could film the therapeutic sessions that you have, and all this would have been fine in sort of traditional documentary access terms. But then I started to think about another kind of access that I had, I knew someone who had been an insomniac more or less his entire conscious, self-aware life. He was willing to do whatever it took to help me make the film. He wasn't afraid to make fun of himself. That's one of your points. His wife was willing to allow a camera into the bedroom. In fact, from time to time, she was willing to use it. They gave me access to his dream journals. He was. They were about to. He and his wife were about to have a baby, which I thought was kind of cool. And not only that, he was a filmmaker, which I was really interested in me. Yeah, I had access to me, right? And I thought, why make a film from the outside looking in? Why not make a film about insomnia from the inside looking out?
Okay.
Cut to clip.
Let's take a look at Wide Awake, and then we'll come back to Doug's clip.
I need to set mine up.
I will, yeah.
Those electrodes are monitoring my brain waves, my eye movement, my heartbeat, my breathing, the oxygen in my blood, the muscle tone in my chin, my leg movement. Not only that, but there's a camera on the wall and a microphone hanging from the ceiling. The only thing they can't record is what's going on inside my head.
Every night when I put my head to the pillow is like an adventure. I never know how long it's going to take me to sleep, if I can fall asleep.
But what always happens is that my mind starts to race, uncontrollably.
I don't shut off. My brain doesn't shut off.
And I can't control where it goes or for how long.
Thank you.
So, Doug, just before you set yours up, Alan was talking about access to himself. In The Kids Grow Up, you have a young daughter whose life you're chronicling, and as she matures, she doesn't have much choice in giving you that access at the beginning, and then she begins to question it a little bit.
I would take total exception to that. Of course she had a choice. She loved filming when she was young. And then as she grew into a teenager, she liked it a little less. I actually had a thought, though, about this thing of access, and the access was me. Yes, we have access to ourselves, but, there is resistance, even though it's us, and we're giving permission and signing a release form and all that. And that comes in the form of, tremendous insecurity and doubt and, lying awake at night going, why the hell did I think this was a good idea? To film myself trying to sleep, it's...
Well, may I just interject? Because it's one of my... There I am. Okay, yeah, I made it sound like it was easy, right? I mean, so there I am lying in bed in the middle of the night during the course of making that film. And a part of me is saying, what kind of schmuck am I for how did I get myself into this? I can't sleep. And now an overlaying reason that I can't sleep is because I'm making a film about sleep. And this is the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I hate myself for doing this. And and obviously this can't end until the film is finished, but how can I finish the film? Because I'm too tired to even do anything.
Alan, just try doing a film about your mother's diaries, lying asleep at night going, can Jews burn in hell for doing this to their mother?
Meanwhile, that's the subject of my film, because I'm the filmmaker and the subject, right? And that's the subject saying, this is crazy. And the director of me is saying, this is fantastic. I'm inside this guy's head. I'm deeper inside the head of an insomniac that anyone's ever been. Let's go further. Let's go deeper, further, more. And that's the kind of tension that I was experiencing during the course of making that film.
Interesting. So your comment, the subject saying this is crazy, Doug, I think you labeled this clip "The Subject Strikes Back."
Yes.
So do you want to set this up? Right?
Sure. This is actually from a DVD extra that came with The Kids Grow Up, because after every personal doc, they don't do DVD extras much anymore, but I really do try and give the subjects their own time to, to say what they thought of the film, every aspect from the filming to the public reception. And so this was in the immediate aftermath, but it's really interesting because this was like 6-7 years ago. So what you'll see is my daughter Lucy talking to her about her reaction to the film, and it's just part of it. But it took about 3 years before we sat down and she actually kind of got to the crux of what had bothered her all along, which is like, Dad, were you playing a role in the film? Or is that how you really felt? And for some reason, for years, it took her, she just kind of like didn't even want to talk about it for a long time. And now, I did another interview last year. It's like we're still working this stuff out. It's really, really tough. But anyway, so this clip is just a little bit of that. I thought it would get at sort of the heart of working with your family as subject.
Does anyone use this mug?
No.
Can I take it?
Yep.
Cool. I'm gonna take my hot beverages around campus in a mug.
What did you make of the film when you saw it?
Well, I saw it a lot of times.
Okay, let's go back to like when you first time you saw it as a rough cut.
The first time I saw it was with you in my dorm room, and you showed me whatever early cut you had, and there was the stuff about me and Romain, and I had never known that you'd never expressed anything about being uncomfortable with having my boyfriend come stay with us.
So what are your plans for the future?
It was just extremely uncomfortable to watch that with you.
Personally, professionally, every facet of your future.
It was just this weird moment when I was like, I couldn't tell if my dad really felt that way or if you were being a filmmaker and trying to make that part of the movie.
I love that moment. It's just I love that moment in the film, but then also just hearing her reaction to watching it herself. This is still, going back to the access question, this is still an ongoing conversation with your daughter.
It's totally ongoing, and I'm actually making a new film that is a kind of personal look into the whole area of personal documentary filmmaking. So I'm talking to a lot of other filmmakers who do this kind of work, and because I'm wrestling with, I've come off doing now 4 personal docs, and the last 2 were ones that I had in my mind for many, many, many years. Well over a decade each. The one about Lucy, and then I did a film called 112 Weddings. I do weddings on the side to tide me over, and I went back to 9 of the couples who I filmed over the years to talk about their marriage. And I knew almost from the first wedding that I would probably do something like that someday. And at the end of that run last year, I just, there was one of these moments where I had God, I don't have a project on the runway like I've had for 20 years. What next? And the thought of going back and doing this to my family one more time just seemed made me kind of miserable. Really, do I want to put them through this again? Do I want to mine them one more time as fodder for my art? And it's sort of out of that question that, I sort of decided it'd be really, really interesting to go to all these friends and colleagues that I have whose work I so admire, who are real artists, who don't just aren't just telling their stories, but like do it in a way that is just so artistic, and cinematic, and real filmmakers, and and I think the time is right, given this kind of weird selfie culture where everybody's throwing up their stories in one way or another on the internet these days, especially kids growing up, that it's kind of a ripe time for a critical reappraisal of the form. So it's been really interesting navigating it, but I do it in terms of, what was in the DVD extra is actually a lot closer to what I'm after, which is the price we pay for doing this, in terms of feeling like, are we exploiting our family for this, or are we really, doing this because we have access to moments that are so universal, and we're in this very privileged position of getting these incredible moments that nobody else could get, and being able to show them in ways that nobody else can, because we have cameras and we know how to use them, and we know how to tell stories. So it's a very interesting conflict that's a real minefield. And there's one type of documentary filmmaking where they go out to war zones, and it's really dangerous. And then there's another kind of war zone, which is working with your family. That's really dangerous.
So I have one last question for all of you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So please get your questions ready. Doug, going back to your 10 rules of personal documentary filmmaking, you said that a personal doc is not your personal therapy. Alan, I think in an essay you wrote a number of years ago, you were talking about using family home movies, and you said using them in my films as a kind of phototherapy, perhaps even a way towards healing some of the wounds of my childhood. And Gayle, the therapeutic moments are a central spine to your film and to your relationship with your mother. So I'm curious about the. I know that rules are made to be broken and that they're by no means universal, but there is obviously therapeutic elements to this, both I think for the audience and for the filmmakers. But can you all talk about that role, the kind of therapeutic role of these films?
Well, personally, I really try and think of the films, how for the audience, not for myself. I try not to, in a weird sort of way, they're almost postponing grief. It's a way of holding it off. With 51 Bird Street, it was a way of delaying having to grieve for my mother by putting her into the film. And, in a way, doing a film about my daughter going up to college was a way of putting off the, dealing with the loss, and keeping her with me in a way. I just know that when, I was joking about like being up at night trying to deal with my mother's diaries in 51 Bird Street, and the responsibility of going through 40 years of diaries and picking out phrases and words that kind of summarized who she was. It was just a huge responsibility, and I wound up going back into therapy, trying to deal with it. And then I had to stop after 2 sessions because my role in the film was to be, the loving defender of my, dead mother, and, it was in total conflict with what I was discovering in the diaries and any feelings of anger or whatever, resentment. And I just said, I have to stop until the film is done. And then, you also feel like, you've resolved things just because you come to a place of maybe forgiveness or whatever in the film, that it can be confusing thinking that you've actually done that in real life. I sometimes think, I've dealt with my father twice now in films, and I've worked through these issues, these resentments I had as a kid, and all that, and then I realized, I'm still, I don't know, did I convince myself of that, So, I don't know. It's just, I don't think I think each film is its own thing, its own story. And personally, I really try and think of the impact it might have on an audience who knows nothing about me or my family. And I never presume, by the way, that anybody seeing the current film has seen any of my other films. So, I mean, some have, but I would never assume that.
Well, my film was about the journey of, that I took with my mother to forgive her, but I actually had forgiven her before I put the film together. And for me, making the film was a setback because when I found those diaries, for me emotionally and personally, because when I found those diaries, when I figured out I'm going to use that to get the audience in my head at the time, that brought me back. I sat down and started reading through them, and I actually became that wounded little child, and I was reliving the film. reliving the trauma of my childhood. So that became very painful, and I actually became that wounded child again, and that angry child. And there was like a year I would only have my sunglasses on outside because I was constantly crying, and I really was in my female cave. So it was very raw for me. But also in the making of the film and going to therapy, because the film is intercut with therapy sessions with my mother, and there were many, many interviews because I was just pumping her for answers, and she just consistently said, "I don't know, I don't remember." So that drove, in a way, the way Alan's the historian of his family, I am for mine. I've been working on my genealogy since '81, and that's why I have audio tapes of family members that are long dead, and was thrilled when I heard my grandmother's voice. So, my mother's relentless, "I don't know, I don't remember." I was digging up genealogy records and vital records, and then finding family members that were very close that I didn't know existed, like first cousins of hers. But I think what it did, because her constant "I don't know, I don't remember," we went to therapy, and which was great because I wouldn't say she's the most enlightened, evolved person. She's brilliant and she's funny and she has no censor. But at least in therapy with my mother, it brought in an expert who can shed light on situations. And there's a moment where the therapist says to my mother, "Well, Mildred, when it comes to anything emotional, you seem to not remember anything. But when it's practical..." So there are many aha moments that happened, which were phenomenal. So
did you have trouble getting the therapist to agree?
No, not at all. I'm really, really lucky. Actually, one of the therapists, there's a place in New York called the Ackman Institute for Family Research or something, and it's an R&D place for family therapy. And the woman who we worked with is Lois Braverman, who's actually the head of it. I didn't actually know she was Jewish until she was working with us, and suddenly she was crying. She started opening up about her life, what her mother made her do, and made her walk with her shoulders tied back and with a thing on her head and eat this egg every day, and all her stuff came up. And I remember, and she revealed, "Oh, this is like a Jewish mother." That's why I didn't even know she was Jewish. And then I just thanked her for her time, and at the end of the movie you see it because she's like crying. She has a tissue in her hand, and she says she thanks us because my mother does turn around and, well, I don't want to ruin it for you. But anyway, so no, and the other therapist is phenomenal. We found her through research, and she looks like Halle Berry. She's brilliant. And she wrote a book called Surviving Mama, and she's an African-American, brilliant inside and outside woman. And she did a family genogram, which is tracing family behaviors and patterns. And again, my mother's answer all the time was, "I don't know, I don't remember." So what I gave her was my brother's transcripts from the interviews I did with him, and she read up on it, and she was so right on. She said, "Well, according to your sons, Gayle was treated XYZ, so, but anyway, so bringing in the therapist and doing therapy with her in the film was really extremely helpful, because there were many interviews beyond that I asked her. I had other people. I would leave a room. Do you know Lori Gwen Shapiro? She's another filmmaker. I had her come in to ask my mother questions without me being there. So the therapists were great. We did them together. We did them separate.
And Alan, you talked about phototherapy.
Well, I mean, every film is its own, has its own story and has its own post-life reverberations. I made the film I referred to before called Intimate Stranger about my grandfather. My mother has 3 brothers. They're my grandparents' children. My mother and the oldest brother have seen the film 20, 30, 40 times. Every time it's in the New York area, they go to see it. The 2 younger brothers, my 2 younger brothers, barely seen it. In fact, one of them saw it at its premiere and can't see it, could never see it again. It was too painful for him. And I had to deal with that I had opened up a real can of worms for him and pressed emotional buttons that he wasn't ready for and is still dealing with today. But just as an example, the resonance, which is a softer word for my relationship to Nobody's Business story about my father who died in 1991. I'm sorry, 2001. 10 years later. He died in 2001, 3 weeks actually before September 11th in August. You could imagine that you've only seen a little bit. You get a sense of the guy. You can imagine if I hadn't made the film, my relationship to him would have been unfinished business rather than nobody's business, because he was a complicated guy with a lot of attitude and a lot of, I mean, basically in that film I asked him more or less every question I'd ever wanted to ask him. And when he died, my heart was heavy for sure, but my head rather, was as much at ease as I could possibly be, because I knew that we had had this tete-a-tete, if you will, as my father referred to it, a man-to-man conversation that was very important for both of us and very helpful. But in terms of this therapeutic idea, I certainly don't make my films for any purposeful therapeutic thing, but I have to say, and it's going to be true, and it is true in each of your own ways. I mean, my father died in 2001, and I just saw him with you a half hour ago. He's in my life. I show this film all over the world. I talk about him in different languages. In that film are my great-grandparents, my grandparents. I see their pictures. I hear stories about them. I'm still living with them. You talk about genealogy. My genealogy, at least on my maternal side, is inscribed inside that film. And I still live with these people in real time, right now, since the day I made it. They're like a part of my life. My father's voice, I know. I mentioned it earlier. I know it. It's powerful. I don't want to call it therapeutic, but it's kind of cool, is really what I'm trying to say. By the way, that door is really cool, too. I like that. I meant to say that earlier.
I just want to say one thing. In my film, I wasn't worried about my mother, because she never even asked to see the film while I was working on it. I was worried about my older brother, because he's very, very private. And I interviewed him about a year after his wife had died. And he's a lawyer, and he has a big law firm. And I wanted him to voice my father's, I have World War II love letters between my parents in the film, and I wanted him to voice my father's letter. And suddenly he says, I don't want to have anything to do with your film, and I'm sorry I signed a release. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was near finishing it, and I couldn't show it to anyone until I locked it, and I felt good about it because I was too vulnerable. I didn't want to be influenced by anyone in my family. That was devastating for me. So I finished it. I had an actor voice my father's voice. And the bottom line is I ended up arranging a private screening at NYU and flew my mother up, had about 100 people there, and had him see it there. And, it's like I couldn't ask for a better audience. There was a standing ovation. Anyway, so he saw it, and he had, he liked it. He had some, I have been documenting everything, even my father's death, my dog's death. Again, not with plans of sharing it, but I made this film, so there's some of all that in there. Long story short, he came up yesterday from Long Island to see it with his new wife, and I couldn't believe it. He announced that he was so proud of me, which just kind of shocked me. It was the second time he saw it, because the first time he saw it, he definitely liked it, but he was busy being a director. Well, you didn't have to show Dad, dying, etc. And I don't know, it must have just passed. So he was my biggest obstacle, which is a big relief.
To get back to something, Alan, you were talking about, when we question and interview our family members, I mean, I don't know if you guys find it the same way with you, but there's something about the camera as a facilitator, you know, that in our role as, we're not journalists, but, you know, we sort of almost take on that role as detective, as documentarians, historians. You know, we're able to ask, at least in my case, questions of my parents that I would never dare ask in real life. You know, you almost want to provoke them because that's your role there. And for my father in particular, it made him much more comfortable to have the formality of an interview. He was much more revealing than when we had conversations in real life. And my wife has told me, you know, I've interviewed her many times over the years, and she's told me a number of times that you know, she feels like there's some of the deepest, most profound conversations we ever have because she feels like I never listened to her more closely than when I'm interviewing her. Whatever that might mean.
Do you take it to bed?
So, thank you.
That's funny. Very revealing, Doug.
So let's see if anyone out here has questions for over here.
I am from India. We got involved in a struggle about untouchability in India. So I got kicked out. So I want to tell the story. You may call it memoir or something. But it's not to talk about mine. But the question is, so when you're writing something, when you don't have documents or anything, like you have family and other things, you're away and people are not available. So how do you present it? And the second part is, the problem is, one of the dramaturg told me, the facts are boring, but at the same time, if you, sometimes to make it dramatic, you have to exaggerate. So how do you deal with that situation of, you're not telling the lie, but at the same time, you want to make it dramatic, but it may not exactly what really is.
Why not just write a fiction script? I mean, why do it as a documentary?
Oh, I wrote it as a play, and then I changed into a short film that after that.
So is it your personal story that you want to tell?
It's about them, but I'm telling it to me.
Okay, I'm a little slow.
It's my personally how I participated and how we fought the struggle.
About the Untouchables?
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about this after the
Yeah.
thing, because it's a very specific question that you're asking.
And in the front here, we have a mic.
Alan, you were talking about your brother had problems watching your
Uncle.
document.
Yeah,
your
uncle.
uncle.
Yeah, it says my name.
And it made me wonder if there are instances when people make personal memoirs, films, if their siblings or family members resent the closeness that they achieve with other family members that they're interviewing, such as you when you're interviewing your father?
I think each of us might have, we all have siblings, and each of us has an answer to that. I can only say I have one sister, a younger sister, and also I never show the films that I'm making to anyone in my family before they're finished, with one exception, with Nobody's Business. A week before I was locked, meaning I thought the film was done, it occurred to me that I should show it to my sister because, after all, he's her father as well, and she's going to have to live with the film for the rest of her life and our life together. So I brought my sister in, and I said to her, I think I'm done, but I'd like you to watch it, and if there's one frame, one word, anything that you don't think is true, is honest, and you're not comfortable with, I will take it out. I won't even defend it. I won't even try to defend it. And so my sister watched the film, and I watched her watch the film, actually, and she laughed a little and cried a little and had a complicated thing, but in the end said, you know, and she's in the film. She participates in the film. She was okay with it, and so that was the end of it. And I think that she has embraced the film wholeheartedly. From that time, it's made us closer. The fact that we have the film, that it's the story of our father, and it's there for future generations. It's if you can imagine that film, all these films in our lives, they're our home movies. It's a given for anyone in our family. And I've actually distributed with my family, so everyone, my extended family, so everyone has access to it. But I haven't had any estrangement, other than my uncle, the aforementioned story. I haven't had any estrangement issues or resentment issues about that. Yeah, but maybe there's some.
Well, I come to a slightly different way. I mean, I was much more present to this doing the film about my daughter, that I had to be a father first and a filmmaker second. So I made sure she saw it before actually I raised the money. I don't know if you work the same way, but because I'm a one-person crew, I don't even try and get funding when I'm making the film. I generally shoot the whole thing or most of it, put together a fundraising sample of maybe 10, 15 minutes, and get pretty large amounts of funding. I mean, it's expensive, particularly when you work with an editor to make these films. And so I thought it was really important for her to see before I went out and sought the funding. I remember her first vacation back from college, her freshman year. I sat her down and showed her Lucy 30 minutes of footage. I quickly put together some of the stuff that I thought would be the hardest for her to see, the stuff with the boyfriend, the stuff with my wife and I talking about her sex life. The part of my wife had a episode of depression during the year that is dealt with in the film, and I said, tell me now if this is going to wreck your life. Tell me now before I raise this money. And I don't want to have to give it back. And deliberately didn't have her sign a release till she saw it, and turned 18. So I think, each film has slightly different circumstances, but I do, because my family's involved, I do show them cuts before it's locked in. I don't say you can cut anything you want out. I just say, like, if you have a problem, let's talk about it. And they really don't. They've been very good about it. But I don't know. It's just very tricky terrain, and you have to live with. You want to keep your family together. So that's how I deal with it.
I think we have time for one or two more. Just one more. Okay, right here.
Oh, ours were spectacularly received by the masses. Well, I thought it was a great film. I loved Boyhood because it was the first fiction film I'd seen that, there have been some that sort of were sequels, that used the same actors years later. I mean, the same director did the Before Midnight or whatever, series that I thought was great too. But it was the first time I saw in fiction film what, the real strength of documentary is, what you can show people over time. You could see my daughter grow up from a very young girl to, a high school graduate in the course of my film. So that's like a 16, 17-year period. And, if you were doing a fiction film, you would have 4 different actors of different ages playing Lucy. And they would probably go, wow, that's so great. they really look like each other. That's amazing. You know, you always know that there's that layer of artifice to it. But the strength of documentary is this is you know this is genuine, that it's the real people, and there's something very powerful, like I said before, about cutting from Lucy Young to Lucy now, you know, and to go, you know, in all of our films, you know, we really draw on this rich archive of photographs and footage and sounds, even, you know, over many, many years. So that's why I say that it's largely about time. I think time is a big subject of our films, not just relationships with family members and people closest to us, but, you know, we're looking at ourselves at different time periods in our lives. You know, if you look at our body of work, and, you know, I certainly approach time in a different way now at 62 than I did, you know, when I was starting in my 30s. So, but I'm always aware of time and the benefit of it. And that was what was so different about that film. I mean, it's just so rare in I call it fictitious films, you know, to have actors willing to come back year after year and have a director and have that commitment to telling a story over time.
Well, I actually agree with you. In fact, while I was working on my film and people were watching cuts, they kept saying, "Did you see Boyhood? Did you see Boyhood?" And I do agree with you. It was like, you know, if that was a documentary, I would have, if it was real, yeah, it was the same people, but they're playing roles. I would have connected more to it. So to answer your question, why does that get so much acclaim and ours doesn't? I think it's, and I'm not a distributor, I'm about to launch my film ourselves out into the theatrical world. And so I'm navigating this new world for me, but I think it's a matter of distribution, you know? I think it's a matter of docs don't get the buzz that narrative films get, and they don't have the power and the machine behind it. And audience generally gravitate to scripted narrative films. And I think actually that film just proves how people want to feel a reality. They want to watch reality because it was a fiction film, but they grasped to it because it had sort of a documentary quality. So I think what we need as documentarians, so we can win those independent spirit wars, is the support to get our films out widely and get the buzz out there and get that attention, because I think people are hungry for it.
By the way, I think you're in the wrong area if you get into personal documentaries to win awards. You know, I mean, acclaim is nice, and, you know, I think to varying degrees, you know, we get a share of acclaim, and we're seen. I don't know where you've gotten yours out, Gayle, but, you know, between Alan and I, we've had HBO behind our films, and okay, so
well, the doggy movie was.
It's not like these aren't seen. It's all relative. That's all. You know.
But I think we have to actually.
We're
I
at
think
time.
we have to unite and get these movies out widely.
That's a good. Well, it's all relative.
I'm sorry, we're at time. Just one last comment in reference to Boyhood. I would also recommend that you look at American Promise, which was by Michelle Stevenson and Joe Brewster, who actually lived down the street, who filmed their family's life over the course of 13 years. And it, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I could keep talking to you guys forever. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming.